If you want to have incredible relationships with women, you need to learn how to lead a woman emotionally. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through my 3-pillar framework that will massively improve your relationships. I guarantee you that after watching this, you will think differently about the way you approach and interact with women. If we haven't met yet, I'm Keith from The Centered Man, and I've grown tens of thousands of followers, helped hundreds of men, and I spent years writing about and studying exactly how to use psychology to get more of what you want in dating and in relationships. Alright, so when it comes to relationships, most men approach conflict the same way they approach every other problem, and that's by trying to win it, whether that's a better argument or a clearer explanation or just more persistence. But the underlying belief is that you can out-reason a woman and the situation just solves itself. But emotions don't respond to logic the way problems do. Push against an emotional current and you'll discover it pushes back harder, because that's just the physics of force. Every action produces a reaction, and the only principle that changes this dynamic is neither being softer nor more passive, but it's about changing what the conflict is about. In 1882, Yigoro Kano developed judo around one single insight that most people in his era considered totally counterintuitive. And it's that surrender is more powerful than resistance. Imagine the largest, strongest opponent charging at you with full momentum, and the judoka doesn't even brace against it. He steps aside and swiftly redirects the force. The opponent ends up exactly where the judoka intended, carried there by his own agency, without collision or any struggle. And actually, the opponent moved themselves. The judoka simply chose where they ended up. This is precisely what emotional leadership looks like in a relationship context. She will bring great force like frustration, anxiety, argumentation, mood swings, and most men have two choices. They will either meet it head on, which creates an explosion, or soak it up and go quiet, which creates tension that will resurface later on. But there is a third option that almost nobody talks about, and it's to redirect it entirely in a new direction. So what does this look like in real time? Well, let's imagine she's upset about something, but the way it's coming out is totally sideways, like criticism about something really small or a provocative tone that's just clearly looking for an argument. Your first instinct is naturally to defend yourself against the small thing, or try to correct it and explain why the criticism is undeserved. But the small thing isn't the actual dynamic. The actual dynamic is that she's feeling something she can't put into words just yet. A man running emotional judo doesn't engage what's on the surface. He reads what it's pointing to and tackles that directly. He might simply say something off the cuff to dig deeper, like, "It seems like there's something on your mind." But he hasn't given up anything or fought with her. He merely redirected the energy from potential conflict to what it was actually asking for, which is usually to be pointed out in some kind of way, rather than dismissed. Therefore, she follows the path he opened for her, and the conflict that was building up doesn't escalate further or eat away at their own minds. So you might be asking, like, how do you develop this ability in real time? And the best place to start is by learning to slow down the process. It buys you time to avoid emotional reactiveness, which is your biggest enemy when it comes to navigating her emotions. You can't put out fire with fire, so you must avoid the urge to mirror her tendencies, like explaining, defending, generalizing, and weaponizing, because it creates more separation and opposition between you and your woman. Secondly, you have to understand that without labeling her strongest emotions, whatever those may be, you can't positively influence them. So you must point them out to her without putting up a shield. And that gives her the opportunity and the agency to reveal herself to a level where those emotions are simply exhausted. And then you have the agency to redirect them into something meaningful. And here's why this matters beyond merely resolving conflict. The man who leads a woman through his ability to redirect her emotions is also demonstrating something no show of dominance can actually produce, and it's that he understands her emotional landscape well enough to navigate it without tunneling under himself. That's a specific kind of authority, because it's not louder or more forceful. It's just more calibrated. And calibrated authority is what creates the felt experience of being truly led by a man rather than just managed. A woman feels most safe with a man who can remain grounded when she isn't, and actually can take on a great deal of pressure without having a panic attack. So, emotional judo isn't like a communication strategy, as most of you might get that impression. It's the expression of a man whose inner state is balanced enough that he doesn't need conflicts to go his way in order to remain who he is fundamentally. But emotional judo only works if the man using it stands on solid ground, because you cannot redirect a force that's already swept you off your feet. A man without that internal foundation will collapse under pressure. Then he has to overcompensate in unhealthy ways, which means the real question isn't the technique itself, it's about what has to be built before trying to apply it. That's what this next point is about. Because fundamentally, there are two ways a man communicates confidence and dominance in a relationship. The first is very overt, it's open. He talks about his standards, he declares what he will and won't accept, and he makes sure she knows he's a man of substance. The second is more covert, so it's more concealed. He just simply operates from it. His actions, decisions, and presence merely speak for themselves. He doesn't describe it, he embodies it fully. The overt and loud approach signals insecurity because it comes from a need for approval. You're looking for confirmation. The covert approach, on the other hand, is more compelling because it comes from lived experience. You can see the evidence in front of you. And the paradox most men never question is this: the more a man talks about his standards and identity, the less credible his words become. And the reason comes down to something evolution wired into every woman long before dating advice even existed. Evolution didn't wire women to trust what men say about their value. It wired them to observe what men do under pressure. I call this evidence over assertion because words are merely assertions. Anyone can make them. Behavior is evidence. It can only be produced by someone who actually has what it demonstrates. So when you see a man walk away from disrespect without shouting matches or arguments, you know he's the real deal because that's evidence. There's something real at stake beneath the surface. Self-control, the decision to walk away from something he might want, a toughness that doesn't need an audience. You see, words are what you use when you don't have evidence. Therefore, the most powerful move isn't finding better words, it's about closing the gap between what you say and what you do. Because the less you announce and the more you demonstrate, the more credible everything about you becomes. And as Lao Tzu would say, those who know do not speak, but those who speak do not know. You see, overt authority is fragile. It depends on her response to stay intact. And that's the moment she stops responding because there's just nothing underneath. Whereas covert authority doesn't have this problem because it was never built on her response in the first place. It was built on actually being the man rather than describing him. That's the distinction she's reading. Not what you say about yourself, but whether what you say and what you are actually the same thing. So the man who closes that gap entirely stops needing to say anything at all. But you see, covert authority, the kind that doesn't need announcing, is the output of something specific that is being built underneath. And for most men, when they honestly examine what they've built, will find that the foundation that they are building on is thinner than the frame they've been running. And that's what this last point is fundamentally about. Everything we've discussed in this video doesn't exist on its own. It runs on three underlying structures. This is what I call a leadership stack. Three qualities that only hold if they're built in the right order. But most men are trying to install them from the top down. The first pillar is frame. This is the internal architecture of your beliefs, your values, and your sense of who you are and what you stand for, which ultimately determines how you respond under pressure. The second is composure. This is the ability to regulate your own emotional state and lead hers without losing your footing. And thirdly is initiative. This is the capacity to make proactive decisions with genuine certainty, without hesitation or permission seeking. Let's jump into the foundation, which is frame. You see, because you can have the nicest furniture, perfect paint, beautiful lighting, but if the foundation is cracked, the whole structure shifts when pressure hits. Frame is actually what you stand on when everything around you is just unstable. It's not what you do in the moment. It's actually what makes your actions possible. You see, a solid foundation doesn't move when the ground shifts. It absorbs the pressure and is able to stay level. When she challenges you or tests you or you have a destabilizing situation, your frame is whether your internal state holds firm or just collapses. You see, weak frame means you adjust your beliefs to match external pressure, whereas strong frame means external pressure adjusts to you, or it doesn't, and you remain exactly who you are regardless. She isn't changing your state, she's merely revealing it to herself and to you. And in game theory, frame is your commitment device, a strategy you've locked in before the game even starts. Think of Cortez burning his ships after landing in Mexico. The commitment was credible because he eliminated his own exit options. When you have strong frame, you've already decided who you are and what you stand for. You're not doing mental maths in the middle of the interaction, adjusting your behavior based on what you think she wants. You've already committed to an identity, and that commitment makes your behavior predictable to her and actually credible to yourself. Weak frame is like playing poker while constantly having to recalculate your hand based on her facial expressions. You have no stable strategy, so every new input sends you into analysis paralysis type of thing. Whereas strong frame is playing the cards you actually hold, not the ones you think she wants you to have, you see? So you've drawn a line around who you are. Those are the fences. That line doesn't shift when she applies pressure. The second is composure. You can think of this like a thermostat. The room gets hot and the thermostat kicks in and brings it back to baseline. Composure is your internal thermostat, and it doesn't prevent temperature changes. It just refuses to let the environment dictate your emotional state. If she's emotional, you are able to regulate it. If a situation escalates, you are able to stabilize it. And if the interaction just goes completely sideways, you are able to find your footing again without losing who you are or what you stand for. So composure, in a nutshell, isn't about never feeling emotion. It's about your emotional state being controlled by you directly, not by whatever she's feeling or whatever the situation demands. You are not matching her chaotic internal state, and you don't just absorb her anxiety. You have this remarkable ability to set the temperature, and consequently she is able to adjust to it. In psychology, this is called differentiation of self, the ability to stay emotionally present with another person without being absorbed by their state. The key insight is that emotional contagion is kind of default because emotions spread between people automatically, whether that's anxiety, stress, tension, all of it just transfers through proximity. Whereas most men don't realize they're being emotionally infected until they're already completely dysregulated and at odds with themselves. Therefore, composure isn't like a personality trait, it's more like a firewall that you deliberately maintain. And once her emotional state hits you, it gets processed, but it doesn't pass through. This isn't some kind of coldness or callousness, it's more like containment. You feel her emotion, you are able to acknowledge it, but you refuse to let it destabilize your emotional baseline. You become the anchor point around which the interaction stabilizes. And that's a powerful position to come from because you have leverage. The third pillar is initiative. And this is more like your compass, right? You know where you're going. You don't poll the passengers, check the weather twice, or wait for permission to make a turn, right? You assess, you decide, and ultimately you are able to move. Initiative is like directional certainty. You lead because you've already determined what the destination is. There's no hesitation there. There's no, what do you think we should do? Or is this really the right thing to do? You just merely chart the course and she either comes along or she doesn't come along. Either way, the compass is going to point forward for you. So initiative is the output of frame and composure. When your foundation is solid and your state is regulated, decisions merely simplify themselves. You're not paralyzed by needing the outcome to go a specific way before you can make a move. You just move with clarity, and leadership stops being something you do and starts being something you are. It becomes literally embedded in your identity. This is fundamentally a first mover advantage. So the player who moves first is really who controls the outcome, because they set the decision tree. The other player can only respond within the structure the first player has created. So when you lead with initiative in a relationship, you're not just making a decision, you're also removing a certain ambiguity and creating a clear decision point. If you say something like, we're doing padel this morning, it actually forces a binary. If you ask, what do you want to do? It hands her first mover advantage. Now she's setting the structure, and you're the one who's responding to it. And the paradox here is that hesitation signals low expected value, because when you move with certainty, you signal that you've already run the calculation and determined this is the right move. So even if she disagrees with the decision, your certainty about it communicates a degree of competence. And hesitation does the opposite. It communicates doubt. And what is doubt, right? It's contagious. It's like an infection in many ways. This is why initiative can't exist without frame. Behaviorally, it maps to what psychologists call the locus of control. The internal locus means you believe outcomes are determined by your actions. External locus means you believe they're determined by focus outside your control, like other people, circumstances, and her reaction. Men with external locus just always are waiting for permission, agreement, or the optimal conditions before taking action. But in relationship dynamics, simply waiting for certainty is the highest risk move, because it signals you don't trust your own judgment. So yes, initiative is the behavioral signature of that internal locus. You move because you've determined it's the right move, not because conditions are perfect or because she's giving you a green light. So why does this all matter? Well, you can't regulate your state if your identity is under threat, because identity threat triggers defensive responses that will override your emotional control or your ability to control your emotions. You can't lead decisively if your emotional state is dependent on her approval, because you'll hesitate every time a decision risks her displeasure. So the stack has to build bottom up, because each layer provides the psychological preconditions for the next. Frame stabilizes your identity, but composure regulates your state, and ultimately, initiative executes action. If you try to skip layers, the whole structure just collapses under pressure, and your relationships will take a huge hit from it. So frame is your commitment strategy. It's what you stand for. Composure is how you maintain a consistent approach even when the situation is totally unpredictable. And initiative is how you communicate your strategy through your behavior and through your actions. What I realize is that most men try to signal through action before they've built commitment or equilibrium, balance, right? But the result is that their signals aren't credible, because the infrastructure backing them, once she runs a test, the signal just breaks and the trust is completely broken as well. Think of it like Maslow's hierarchy of values in reverse. You can't lead externally before you've built internal stability. Trying to lead without the foundation is like running a business with no operating capital. You can fake solvency for a while, sure, but when the test comes, the structure fails because it was never built to bear weight. The men who succeed ultimately just have better infrastructure. And this doesn't just apply in relationships, it applies in business, in sales, in craftsmanship, in whatever you're doing. And infrastructure is built from the ground up, one layer at a time and in a sequence. So the question in this video was always building towards wasn't whether to use force or emotional judo, or whether to lead overtly or covertly. The question was more whether you've built the foundation and the mindset, right, that makes either approach available to you. Because without it, you're performing leadership and hoping she doesn't lean on it too hard. So that's it, my friends. I'm going to close off this episode here. If you have any questions, as always, please leave them down below. I read every single comment you put. And as always, if you want to book a one-on-one call with me, there's a link in my bio for that. If you have any topic suggestions for the next video, please put them down below and I will have a look. And until then, see you in the next one. Cheers, guys.